"They'll love me when I'm dead," the quite poetic words once spoken by Orson Welles, an acclaimed filmmaker, referring to the fact that many of his films would only receive the attention and appraisal they so deserved only after he was gone. Many of us aspire to be artists, though many artists, unlike Wells, are pretty unknown, or at least their name and their artwork is far more remembered than the actual person themselves, for the name is itself a brand. For a man in Orson Welles' time, there was a general mystique to artistry that unless you were actively seeking out interviews or the people behind these works themselves, you'd know very little about them. And it was those very few that actually became celebrities in their own right. Well, celebrities in the sense of being as famous as the people in front of the camera. Of course, this has changed a lot in the internet with social media and of course the documentation and the ease of which things can be documented and information can be accessed, for better or for worse. And of course, in this day and age, it's unsurprising that many of the well-remembered and followed artists are not the most acclaimed, or just simply that they are the most unique ones. Which, unique is one way of putting it for a lot of these people. Let us enter Uwe Boll.
That is the last update. We have only 4 days to do with the Rampage campaign, and that was my third campaign now. Basically my message is fuck yourself. Because that is so fucking absurd, what retarded amateur idiots collecting money on that absurd website. And it looks like nobody gives a shit about Rampage 3, so maybe I shouldn't do it then. I have enough money to play golf till I'm dead. I want to do Rampage 3 because it is an important movie, but it looks like you're easier giving $600,000 if you make a movie about some retarded wizard in the forest. Or for another, whatever, Marvel Avengers bullshit dirt.
He's such a bitch!
Beginning his feature film directing career sometime in the 90s, it would be towards the beginning of the new millennium that he would switch to English language film. The reason for this is quite simple.
Ended up that I made that comedy with a lot of German stars, like comedy stars and music stars in it. But then finally the movie came out and Universal pussied out and didn't spend money for advertising, made only 50 prints, and it was the end of it basically. So the movie bombed also in the theaters, was then very successful on DVD and video and TV, but it didn't help me. And this made me even more depressed. So I thought, like, genre movies and German-speaking movies, I have to stop it. Let's go forward and let's make American movies. Between 1995 and 1999, I was only producing all kinds of TV movies, all kinds of stuff for Taunusfilm, a daughter company of the first German television program. And then idea was to do English-speaking movies, because then you have the world market where you can sell the movies. And during that time, I explored various financing possibilities. And so finally, we came to the, I came to the decision, because in Germany if you invest in a movie, you get half of your money back from the taxes, so you save taxes basically. And so I went out, I talked with dental medicine guys, with money advisors, and I made my own film fund, and we raised $3 million to do a Sanctimony with Caspar Van Dien, Eric Roberts, Michael Paré.
Of course, Uwe Boll's notoriety is for his interesting choices of projects, shall we say. Most notably, his many video game adaptations into the medium of film, and of course his, shall we say, larger-than-life personality. On top of this, challenging his harshest critics to boxing matches and winning them by knockouts, his often belligerent and competitive nature towards not just his critics, but also to other filmmakers such as Eli Roth and Michael Bay, and his pretty hilarious Letterboxd account, which got banned. Shame on you, Letterboxd. This account was comedy gold. I mean, there is one thing he does have in common with Michael Bay, though: objectifying women. Today, we shall be covering one of his video game to film adaptations. His very first, this year indeed, is the 20th anniversary of the movie. Well, technically we're slightly past this, since the film had a premiere in San Francisco only a couple months earlier, but it wouldn't be in wide release till October, so it counts, shut up. I don't really have much interest in covering anything outside of his film-to-video game adaptations, like his original stuff, but maybe I'll look at one or two of them someday. The House of the Dead, released in 2003. You may or may not be surprised to find out that this wasn't exactly Boll's passion project per se, but rather producer Mark Altman, who was a fan of the original arcade game, and was so eager in fact to bring it to the silver screen that he spent a year with a production company negotiating for the movie rights from Sega. He would also write the story and co-author the screenplay to the film, although a portion of what he would write would end up not making it to the screen. I'll get to that in a bit. Uwe Boll was the director hired to visualize this piece, and this movie actually isn't that bad. I mean, in comparison to a lot of his later works especially, but I feel like worst film ever is probably well above exaggeration. It's no masterpiece, mind you. You'd probably find better, but, you know, I've seen worse zombie films. Much, much, much worse. So, what's the story of The House of the Dead? Don't worry if you've never played the games before, though, because this movie is actually a prequel to the games. Stock character young adults looking to get away to a conspicuous, totally not haunted island to attend a rave party, but unfortunately the boat to the rave has already left, so they decide to bribe a nearby sea captain to get them to the island instead, who is named Captain Kirk. Did I mention Mark Altman had a Star Trek podcast? Also, Captain Kirk is played by the guy from Das Boot. Uwe Boll really wants you to know it's the guy from Das Boot, because he got him the costume from Das Boot as well.
Of course, this is Jürgen Prochnow from Das Boot. We almost found the same leather jacket and the captain hat.
Captain Kirk is probably one of the more fun characters in the movie, alongside his shipmate, played by Ron Howard's brother Clint Howard. They get to the totally no spooky island, only to find that the rave has been deserted. Two of them are about to play Scrabble in a tent, but then one of them runs off to take a leak.
I just gotta go and take a piss is all. All this beer's gotta go somewhere.
While the other one gets killed by zombies. Meanwhile, the other ones go look around for other people only to find a deserted house, presumably of the dead, and discover a bunch of survivors from the rave, which, surprise surprise, got invaded by zombies. Damn it, knew we should have gone to Fire Festival instead. One of these survivors of the rave also happens to be Alicia's ex-boyfriend. They go back to the rave area, and they find one of their friend has become a zombie. But she gets taken out fairly quickly by a member of the Coast Guard who is following the sea captain to the island because the Coast Guard had been following him for a while for smuggling goods. The surviving party heads back to Kurt's boat to see if they can escape, only to find that that's been overrun by zombies. And then Kurt goes on an exposition about how this was the place of banishment for a guy called Castillo Semano, a man banished for evil, abominable, heretical experiments, which gave him the power of immortality. See, you can tell this exposition flashback is the past because it's graded in sepia tone. Kirk leads them to the area where he unloads some smuggled goods, which is full of a bunch of guns, and they use them to get past a horde of zombies to get back into the house they were in before. In a very explosive, over-the-top Matrix-X sequence, which is probably the first moment in the film that comes close to the House of the Dead spirit. Oh yeah, there's these, for the Matrix action sequence, there's this 360-degree rig that they use to spin around the actors while they were shooting or while they die. This was also, incidentally, one of the very last films to use this rig because it was also incredibly dangerous.
They are on a table, and the camera spins around the table with 150 kilometers an hour, super fast. If you fell down, you get hacked in pieces by the camera.
You know, it totally makes a lot of sense that these privileged spring breakers can get handed guns once and are immediately sharpshooters. Following this shootout, there's this weird montage of everything that had happened to the movie at this point, which doesn't really feel earned, and only happens literally right after Jonathan Cherry sees one of the other characters get killed. Oh yeah, a bunch of them have died up to this point, and then when they go down into this tunnel, the single black friend also dies, and then they get led away to this area by Greg, who, as it turns out, is actually Costello wearing Greg's skin. Not sure why he needed to wear the cape as well, though. Did he just want to make an entrance? Costello's ultimate endgame being wanting to be able to continue his experiments with whomever comes to his domain, so that on top of his existing Live Forever serum, he can also construct a skin that will last forever, so that he can cure himself of being a walking, rotting flesh. They escape Castillo's hideout, they fight in a elaborate sword fight, Castillo stabs the lady between the boobs, and Castillo dies, with only 2 survivors of the group being left. They are picked up by the AMS agents. In the final scene of the film, we get the surprise plot twist that supposed main hero of the film, Rudy, is actually Rudolph Curian, the soon-to-be villain of the first House of the Dead video game. To the filmmaker's credit, casting Jonathan Cherry seems to have worked out pretty well, since he does convincingly look like a younger Curian. Uwe Boll didn't really like the script given to him by Altman, but he was interested in making a zombie picture, and becoming more aware of the success and popularity of House of the Dead, he agreed to do the film, with his only stipulation was that he got to remove a lot of dialogue that he didn't like, and
In one hand, I'm really proud of that movie. On the other hand, I think it was overall the worst developed script I ever worked with. And I was also not so experienced like now as a director, and where we actually shot it, I was sitting there a few times on set and thought like, we really cannot shoot it this way. It's too stupid, it's too absurd, we cannot do it, we have to change it. And so this is what I did then, and on set I omitted, I think, 80% of the dialogue, not 80%, but let's say 50% of the dialogue I definitely omitted on set, and said, okay, instead of saying anything, you should go and you say nothing.
as well as a subplot, this being that Castillo was captured by the Spanish because he was betrayed by his lover, the Queen of Spade, who looks exactly like one of the people who came to the island in this film. Even though this subplot was cut from the film because Boll thought it was too cheesy, there is still a line of dialogue left from this that in the final cut of the film doesn't really make a lot of sense.
I've been waiting for you for a long time.
There was also an opening introduction where we would have seen more of the characters prior to going to the island that was never filmed due to the fact they were running behind schedule due to rain and overshooting on the action sequences. So a narration was prepared instead to set things up. Yeah, the acting in this film is not great. In fact, I'd call it like subpar, but I'd say it's about on par with the video games, to be fair. The weird transition effects where the film will occasionally intersperse with footage from the game, which Uwe Boll thought was a good idea, but it just came off as really silly. In fact, me and my friends all laughed when it came up. Jonathan Cherry's character is the narrator, but he doesn't really have that much of a significant role. That I feel like main character is a bit of a loose description. Jonathan Cherry doesn't really have that significant a role that it's hard to even consider him the main protagonist when, despite the fact he's the narrator, he only appears once in the first 30 minutes of the movie, and doesn't really have any more a significant role than any of the other characters. The zombie makeup in this film looks pretty good though. Yeah, there's some decent action sequences for a low-budget movie. Unfortunately, we don't get any of the crazier zombies or monsters from the game, like the dogs or the flying ones, but that was probably for the best, given the budget and time that they had for this film. We do, however, get to see, like, this fish thing in a tank, as well as this moss zombie in the cave, and even, like, these even older conquistador zombies, which are kind of, I presume, the ones that came with Castillo, so some attention to detail was made. House of the Dead was followed by a sequel a few years later, although not directed by Uwe Boll. In fact, there was even a third movie planned. However, they would end up losing the movie rights, so they basically reworked it into its own thing. Well, own thing in that it was a completely unrelated zombie movie. Maybe there aren't really enough connections to the games, you know, on account of it being a prequel. I could almost see this being retroactively fitted into being a corpse killer movie instead, but I do think the game elements are there enough in spirit. Not that this is necessarily a replacement for the gaming experience. According to one of the commentary tracks, Altman says that the budget for the film was $5 million, but Box Office Mojo reports this at $12 million, so I'm wondering if there was some dodgy accounting practices behind the scenes. House of the Dead ended up being somewhat of a success, despite being panned by critics. It was technically Uwe Boll's most successful film at the US box office, and sold a lot of copies on DVD. In fact, the moderate success of the film would see Boll would receive many emails in regards to other film writers and producers interested in having him look at scripts for other potential video game movies on spec, the next one being Alone in the Dark. Of course, that's not the end of the House of the Dead story, because as his reputation as the schlock master of video game movies would grow, Uwe Boll would put out a second version of the House of the Dead movie, this being, of course, known as House of the Dead Director's Cut or House of the Dead the Funny Version, which opens with a entirely new opening sequence featuring Uwe Boll captured by terrorists and forced to watch, as punishment, House of the Dead. This isn't so much a traditional director's cut, but more so pop-up edits like word balloons and outtakes swapped in from the takes used in the theatrical version to, I guess, create a funnier version of the movie.
Don't eat the meatloaf.
And Marcus Slabin from Hell House and Kick-Ass Horror Reviews was a Boll hater who came up, and in the beginning, in that DVD beginning where they want to kill me, on the left side it's Will Sanderson. It's actually funny that he said he ruined the career of tons of actors, including Will Sanderson. So it is Will Sanderson and Marcus Slabin, one of the internet Boll enemies, but now after he saw a lot of my movies, now he likes me more. But he was here also, and I told him, you can put in comic pop-ups completely uncensored. And this is what happens then, and I think the movie here is absolutely hilarious and absurd.
And it ends on a message basically lampooning the viewer dumb enough to buy or rent this movie. So true, King. So true. Honestly, this is probably the most pointless director's cut I've ever seen. And not so much the fact that I believe Boll was beneath this, but the fact that this is clearly just a troll version that was somehow good enough to be put out on DVD, officially. Like, a company like Lionsgate saw this and thought, ooh, yes please. I would say it doesn't really need to exist, but the audio commentary track for the funny version is actually a lot better and more insightful than the theatrical version. So if you've got any interested in learning more about Uwe Boll, I definitely recommend tracking down this version and putting on his commentary track instead. Uwe Boll retired from filmmaking sometime in the mid-2010s, being unable to get the funding he needed, as the home media markets that his films often relied on to make money had dried up due to streaming. Although he is apparently returning to filmmaking now, and he's hardly the most hated filmmaker these days. In fact, he has kind of become a lot more of a cult figure for his unashamed personality and rants. I can assure most of you watching this video, you don't need Uwe Boll to ruin your favorite video game with a movie. Netflix will do that all the time. The question is though, how does it compare to the George Romero Dead trilogy? That's a fucking stupid question, I'm not gonna dignify that with an answer. But I would compare it to some of the other lesser zombie movies from the same time, like Hell of the Living Dead or Zombie Holocaust. They're still fun movies to watch, even if I wouldn't consider them good. As it goes though, The House of the Dead is not an unwatchable movie. Like I've said before, I've seen a lot worse in terms of both zombies, horror, and video game movies. If you wanted a good action horror movie, I'd probably tell you to watch Dog Soldiers instead, but you can still do worse than this.
Fuck yourself.